communication is really for us about doing our very best to stay curious.
Yep.
And to be understanding.
Yep.
And to be non-judgmental in a way that's like, no matter what people have ever said to us, we're not like, oh, you're a bad person.
No, because there are no bad people.
No.
There's only hurt people. And when you see people from where they're really at, it creates a lot of clarity around that whole bit. And
the spiritual chiropractor.
My friends call me the real life care bear.
Talk it out. Welcome to podcast number 13 of Black Sheep Thinking's thing.
13, that's scary. They eliminate that entire floor. And,
yeah, this is actually 14.
Yeah, we're skipping right over it.
It's bad luck.
14.
We are going to talk today about communication and all the things around it.
Yes. Communicating
properly. Which is ironic.
I assume what you really mean is communication.
You're not listening to what I'm saying?
I think I already know what you're going to say. So,
so communication is a major thing with people. Oh, by the way, we didn't even introduce ourselves in our last episode.
No, we didn't.
Yeah, I know who we are.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Morgan.
And we are Black Sheep Thinking.
Yeah, welcome to episode 13 about communication. We are going to discuss what gets in the way of proper communication and all the barriers as much as we can in the next.
Yeah. And assumptions.
Yeah.
Assumptions, what that does to
what happens when you assume.
Yep. Make an ass out of you.
No, I was going to say you make a decision out of incomplete information.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, communication's, I once heard it, the best line I ever heard is, it's never about communication, it's about comprehension. It's about understanding.
I like that.
Yeah,
I really like that.
Yeah, me too, because you can speak all you want, but if no one's really understanding you.
Yeah.
Which is one reason why when we're working with clients, we define terms, not because we're like, you need to think of it this way.
Yeah.
But we need to understand that we're speaking the same language.
Yeah.
When we use the word love, for example, some people are like,
as they go to romantic love.
Love. Yep. Or unconditional love. When we say acceptance instead, they think that means accepting behavior rather than accepting people for where they're at.
Yeah.
So just having those terms defined, sometimes that's really helpful.
It really can, because otherwise you get into like argument semantics and definitions of words. And so if you can clarify that ahead of time, which is the importance of communication, right? If you can create clarity around the understanding, then it helps you understand each other better. And then you're coming from a place of two people trying to understand each other instead of trying to be understood.
Right. Yeah, when Stephen Covey said, seek to understand before being understood, I used to thought that was like a cool thing to be like, be curious of somebody and then you get a chance to be heard. But, as Arizona Andrew said, he was like, he didn't love it because he said it's very agenda driven.
Yeah.
And the moment you understand somebody, you no longer need to be understood because you see where they're at and you get to be part of that experience with them and see them clearly. Too many people in communication, when people are talking, they want to be right.
Yep.
Or they want to prove themselves.
Yep.
Or they want to they say, oh, it's almost like because if they're wrong, if they feel wronged or they don't feel heard, they feel like they don't matter or they're not right. And then they're like, oh, well, that means not enough.
Yeah. It's amazing how much identity will get in the way when you're trying to communicate. And so many times I know for myself in the past where I've like tried to say what I thought I was saying from up here. And then it comes out completely different and it comes across in a totally different way. And you're like, that is not what I meant by that.
It's true. Yeah, when you're communicating from a place of strategy.
Yeah, of strategy and defending your identity and trying to prove that you're right or trying to prove yourself in a situation.
Yeah, so when you're one of the major tips we have when it comes to communication, we joked about it at the beginning about not making assumptions. But a lot of people make assumptions on people's behavior because they look at their behavior or they look at what their own story. They look at their own story and then say, oh, well, that doesn't align with my reality. So I can't accept a different opinion or I can't accept someone for where they're at. And so what happens is it's just two people bouncing back information and there's really no understanding whatsoever. There's just two people talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Just two people trying to prove themselves or prove that their identity is right.
Yeah, which is the basis of all conflict.
Yeah.
That's
which we've already touched on conflict. And that's where conflict really arises, is in that communication. And so are you communicating from a place of identity and trying to prove you're right, or are you trying to seek clarity around whatever you're communicating about?
what do you find is like the best experience of communication for you?
The best experience of communication?
Yeah.
Well, I always enjoy when I'm with somebody like you and I, where I know I can speak freely because I know you're not going to judge me on the things that I
right. Like I'm not trying to misunderstand you.
Exactly. Yeah. You're not looking for an argument. We're looking to just communicate and enjoy each other's company and hear each other.
Right. When someone's around you that's like wants you to change your language.
Yeah.
You know, like
the lawyering.
Yeah. The lawyering. Yeah. I prefer if you use this word. I'm like, I don't.
Yeah.
You know, don't use the word love. Use the word acceptance. Sorry. But, you know, but I mean, when you look at that, it's like some people come with instruction manuals where you have to start like catering around.
Yeah.
And, you know, for example, like a big trend, which I understand, where I coach Special Olympics, I've worked a lot with people who have different abilities, and it's really interesting. They don't care so much for they don't get offended by it, but the R word. And people get really offended about a word.
Yeah.
And I understand that they're trying to be good people, but if they look at the history of that word, it's starting in the DSM-V, the Diagnostic Manual for Psychologists. The original word, and I don't know the very original one, but the history of it was they kept changing it because it was dumb, moron, idiot, stupid. Those are all words that meant the same as the R word.
Yeah.
So if you've used any of those other words, but you think you're virtue signaling that I'm a good person, it's like, I get it's not. And for us, it goes for me, communication's about context.
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between using any word.
Yep.
So, for example, there's a big difference between being like, oh, you're an a-hole and you're an a-hole.
Big time.
You know, those are that the intent matters, and the impact can only be experienced by the person who would choose to be offended by language rather than look past it and see that person's experience and who they are and kind of understand where they're at. Because anyone who would say with mean intent, well, that says something about where they're at.
Yeah.
And when someone's using it in a different way for you to get offended, you're choosing that as part of your identity to be, you know, because you're trying to be a good person or you're trying to protect people. And we understand why. And we're not advocating that people go out there and just say the word what they want. But I mean, there's a concept of, you know, being understanding enough to understand where you are in society and stuff. But I just want to bring that to awareness to be like, when people start luring other words where they're like, well, I prefer this language, or I prefer this approach. And if you start putting those walls and you become the kind of person, if I feel like I have to navigate too much around somebody because they can't understand me from a place of love, I would rather just avoid that conversation completely, which isn't a great place, because how do we treat people? Because it's a risk. It's a risk to my well-being to be around someone who I have to not be myself with. And so because that's a risk. How do you treat risks? You fight or flight. Yeah. And so that you wonder why people are always arguing with you or avoiding you. Maybe you have to take a look at the sense of how you're communicating because you want to prove something. Why? Because you don't want to feel dumb. You don't want to feel, you want to feel that your point's valid because you've experienced something. You ever notice how people will fight more aggressively with you on a communication piece when they've had a personal experience that's meaningful to them and their context, rather than looking at that situation where we're dealing with someone who's in an abusive relationship, person she was with
had an experience of that in her past and really defended that whole situation when we were like in a position of like trying to empower her to walk away.
Right. We're encouraging her to stand up for herself, not by fighting, but by choosing herself.
Yeah.
And she might have had to make a tough choice, but it was what she wanted. And the other person was like, well, it's tough. It's not so easy just to leave an abusive relationship. We're like, it is an easy choice. It doesn't mean the outcome of that choice is easy. But name one.
The process of doing it isn't the easy part.
Yes.
It's the choice to actually make that choice for yourself and put yourself first.
Yeah, choice to heal is easy.
Yeah.
What comes afterwards is the drift into awareness, and there's the work. It's not hard, it's different.
Yeah.
And we see things as if everything in life we avoided because it would be difficult on the choice, no one would graduate university or ride a bike or have children. Like there would just be no life.
Yeah, all the best things in life come from that struggle and that putting the work in and getting through to the other side.
And so communication is really for us about doing our very best to stay curious.
Yep.
And to be understanding.
Yep.
And to be non-judgmental in a way that's like, no matter what people have ever said to us, we're not like, oh, you're a bad person.
No, because there are no bad people. There's only hurt people. And when you see people from where they're really at, it creates a lot of clarity around that whole bit. And so like you had said about, excuse me, people who see that they're constantly, either people avoid them or they're always in a conflict, they're always in an argument. The challenge with that is sometimes what I see is people don't want to take that hard look at themselves, because what they compound on top of that when they do is they believe they have to judge themselves.
Yeah.
In order to fix that, or they'll start to blame themselves. It's my problem. I've done something wrong. It's because of me. And it's like, no, but you have an opportunity to really see yourself clearly and see what's getting in your way of having open, clear communication.
Right. It goes by the quote we've mentioned before. When I'm clear, I see people from where they're from. When I'm not clear, I only see them from where I'm from.
Exactly.
And it's the story. So it's an opportunity. And it's never one-sided often. It's usually two-sided, because as soon as one side recognizes...
I just said that to my kids tonight. I have an 11-year-old and a 12-year-old. They're 18 months apart. And so they're almost like twins. And my son just started feeling better, and I can hear them bickering back and forth. And I said, guys, it takes two crazy people to have an argument. One of you has to stop and realize that you want something different right now. And so I don't care who does it. I'm not telling you who has to do it. I'm just saying, in order for this conflict to end, in order for you guys to stop arguing, one of you has to decide you don't want to argue anymore.
Yeah, it's true. And then become compassionate and understanding. Because it's so funny when there's resistance, as soon as one person relaxes, the other person will fall into the experience of being heard. And we talk about this kind of lose-lose, win-lose, lose-win, all those ways that conflict is.
Yeah.
We think win-wins are a compromise. That's not what we want. And we talk about in communication at our very best, because it's not perfect. We all get stuck in not being seen and not being validated in a situation, then we start to overreach. But if we can put the relationship before the conversation and ask permission and be curious, it will allow things to have a better flowing conversation, rather than believing that there is a left or a right, or a win or a lose. And so, for a lot of people, like I said, we've talked about this before, like when we talk, some people think, oh, they talk like this is, the only thing. And we know it's not. And we stay curious on other things. And when people are like, well, what about, because we've talked about psychology not working, people are like, well, it worked for me and my therapist. I'm like, okay, like we'd love to have a conversation about it, not to prove our point, but I'm really curious, because if you're experiencing success, is it replicable? Why is it not happening for others? What are we missing on this? And
we get to know a little bit more about what's happening there.
And when people get a chance to really communicate and take a look at their own belief systems that tie into what they already know, then often it either opens up to a greater understanding, or it creates an opportunity for us to grow to it. And ironically, though, a lot of times it's they're holding so tightly to what they think they know.
Yes.
And it's like, never let what you, if you only know what you know, you will stop growing.
Yep.
And so, and I'm not saying that you have to be open to, but we're always open to,
of course.
And again, we don't want to debate.
No.
How often do you get in discussions that are like argumentative?
Nowadays?
Yeah.
Not very often. I used to a lot.
Me too.
I used to witness you
online.
You used to debate pretty heavily. You were always, because
only when it comes to LeBron James being the greatest basketball player of all time.
The really important
all you Jordan fans out there. And I love Jordan too. And I understand why people do. And that's why I don't get in much of an argument, is because like, you're with stuff that is really there's no right answer. There's so many gray areas and things. You're like, okay, you're allowed to have your own criteria on certain things.
Yeah.
But there are things that we do know about life. There are things, not just we, but people in general. They know. I love hearing experiences of people that are in their 70s, 80s, hearing about their experience of life and what they've understood.
Of course.
And if you remain curious, understanding, loving, then you're not going to have a harder time to communicate. But when do you find is the hardest time for you? When do you slip out of most?
When I'm being hard on myself, when I see that when I start to judge myself as, life isn't going quite the way I want it. And where I probably see that communication break down the most, is my mom and I are really close. And as you know, we own a house together.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we just it's like a wall goes up. And if one of us is in identity, or both of us are in an identity, I guess identity crisis, I would call it, where we're like really,
I like that.
where we're really settled into our identity and we can't get out of that, we'll bump heads until one of us kind of gives. And so I'll give her the grace for that too, where she'll like sometimes call me out and just be like, I see that you're having a really hard time and you're being hard on yourself right now. And that's okay. What can I do to help you? And then vice versa, I'll try and do the same thing if I'm lucky enough in that moment to really see what's happening. And more now, both of us are able to do that and shift out of it.
Yes. That's so true. And I've seen that go quite faster for both of you and how you've grown. I think it's wonderful because it's not about being perfect. In communication, it does take two. Someone has to receive it and someone has to be able to communicate it effectively from these places. But yeah, for me, when I think when I slip out of it the most is when I feel like I'm trying to hear, but I'm not being heard. And I feel like there's this unfairness of like,
yeah, and
then I'm trying to be heard, but I'm also trying to be understanding it as well. And then I just completely just turn into, either sarcastic or frustrated and or if I feel like I'm not being heard repetitively. And again, it's not like a domineering, like you need to, I never care if someone agrees, but I do care for me. I find it struggling when someone doesn't want to listen enough.
Yeah. When you're really open and you're trying to hear their side and you can see the wall go up and they just refuse to have any form of understanding towards what you're having to say, I would say that's probably one of the most frustrating ways to communicate, is because it is frustrating when you have two people that are just arguing their side. But when you're on your side and you're like, hey, I'm really trying to understand you, but I can see that you just have no interest whatsoever in understanding me because you've decided the way the world is.
Yes.
And you're not going to budge on that.
Yeah. I'm trying to teach my son the difference between hearing and listening, right? And being active, involved, and understanding what's going on. I always tell him, because he's like, he thought, and I think most people think, like, listening means obedience.
Right.
And I was like, no, I don't want you to be obedient.
Which is a common thing for kids. Right?
And I think adults too. If I listen, I lose. If I listen, I'm acknowledging the other side is in a power position or right.
Yeah.
And it's not about that. For me, it's like, I want him to listen to the point where he can take it in and tell them back and say, okay, what I'm hearing is this. Great.
Yeah.
Then he can make discerning choice on if it matters to him or not.
Yeah.
If it's important, because listening with obedience creates robots, but listening with discernment allows us to engage and decide what's right. And I also get frustrated with communicating when I hear people talk and then you feedback to them like, hey, here's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And they go, well, and then because they don't want to accept what they just said and they're just talking, they change the goalpost or they go in a different direction. And then they're like, well, I don't know. And it's like, it's really frustrating when you can't trust people's words.
Yes.
And they're like, that's all we have is trust of each other's communication.
Yeah.
So it's like, know what you're saying. And, I'm not trying to misunderstand you. I'm trying.
There's a really cool story in Matthew McConaughey's book, Green Lights. Yeah. When he talked about he was in Africa and there was two of the guys, I think that were his guides. I'll probably butcher this story a little bit, but anyways, they were, a young woman came up to them and was soliciting them for sex. She was a prostitute. And, they started to have a discussion about that. One guy was pro that she's doing what she has to do to make money and that's just a part of the lifestyle. And the other guy was like, no, that's not right, that she's selling her body the way she is. And so they were having this discussion back and forth. And McConaughey says, he's just sitting there watching it go back and forth. And he pipes in and he goes, no, here, I think he's right. And the guy that he was trying to defend turns and looks at him and goes, no. It's not about right or wrong. It's about, do you understand?
Yeah.
And he's like, and I realized in that moment, they weren't arguing with each other. They were trying to understand each other.
Yeah. And I wish more people would approach it that way, because if we put on us rather to convince people, we put on us to say, I want to make sure that, because I've seen people in discussions like that and I'm like, make them a bet. Like, I'll give you $100 if you can repeat back to this person.
Yeah. Are you really listening?
Are you listening or are you just waiting to talk?
Yeah.
And that's because it's just instantly going in your head, like, how do I defend my position? And that's not communicating.
No, which that actually leads us into a really good thing about listening. About listening, because there's the different ways that people listen, right? Like, people either listen to contradict.
Yes.
They either listen to speak, to prove their point, or they listen to agree.
Right.
And the best way to listen is like a video camera and just true ear, no judgment, no opinion.
Yes. Great point.
Yeah.
Way to bring that up. Yeah. Because if you're just clear.
Yeah.
You'll get somebody, and that's where the biggest growth, and that's where people put down the weapons, and that's where your identity is not involved, and you don't need to prove, like, because again, what are you going to prove?
Yeah.
I mean, I joke around with some of my buddies about the goat, and I know that I'm never going to win that argument. And I know that. And it's just fun banter at a barbecue, which is what it's about for us on once a month with the guys. It's banter.
Yeah.
And there's growth in that, within that. And I love that we all, people shift and move, and, but there's no force, there's no judgment, there's no animosity. And when you can remove that from your communication and make sure you're clear. And I love taking ownership. And when I say something, I'm like, am I making sense?
Yeah.
Rather than, do you get it?
Yeah.
Because then that challenges their intellect to be like, are you smart enough to understand what I'm saying? Versus, am I clear in my communication? Because that's not always the case.
And that's one thing I admire about you, is the way that you will continue to come back to something just to make sure that you've communicated it clearly, to make sure that people are understanding you, to check in. And I watch you do that with people, to check in on them and be like, are you understanding what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
to
make sure that you're being clear with what you're saying. I really do admire that about you.
And because we're very fortunate. I mean, all we have in this work is our language and our ability to try to communicate something invisible. And we always talked about, the opening line of the talk I gave, where it's like, I'm about to introduce you to something where there's a limited amount of language, and it's challenging to talk about the invisible. So we asked them if they've ever tried salt before, and they laugh. And then we asked them if they've ever try imagining going across to someone at your table and describe the taste of salt without saying salty.
Yeah.
And then remember, we asked Chat GPT. We went in and said, can you define salt without it? Oh, no way, man. It was a paragraph. It was a lot. It was so,
I didn't know if you memorized. Sometimes you memorize things.
Imagine, that's true. I should. But it was like, imagine the taste of a sea with the breeze that goes in and changes the elemental. It was so deep, and you're like, wow, it's like a philosophy page out of a philosophy book. And you're like, and that's how convoluted language can get when we're trying to describe something to another person. Yeah. It's like trying to describe the taste of purple. Without saying great. So you can get it, or whatever. It's really challenging to describe certain things. And in communication, the best thing we can open up with is recognizing that never make anybody wrong.
Yeah.
And when you make somebody wrong, they want to overprove. And rather than making them wrong, you're not making them right either by agreeing. You're just trying to see the world from their perspective. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that there's a winner or a loser in communication.
Yeah. Well, and we always say it's one of the defining things that will end communication or create a conflict or challenge in communication is just saying no but.
Yeah.
We've always said, let's not say that anymore.
Yeah. You and I have that agreement.
We have that agreement that it's always going to be yes and.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly. It's like the improv rule.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're always, because it's never no but. It's like, we're not trying to one up each other and make each other better. We're trying to say what he said. Also, here's another add on or perspective and that.
Because then it doesn't take away from what the person has said. It doesn't make them wrong. It's just like, yes, and here's another way of saying that.
And that's created in group situations magic for us. I mean, huge. I mean, a lot of the people who are in coaching world have looked at us and thought, how do you guys do that together? It's not very, how common is it for you to meet two coaches that have sat in a room without ego and support and help people grow the way we've had the opportunity to do? It's very rare, which is why I really feel fortunate for it that we have this great chemistry and understanding on how to bring out the best in each other.
Me too, man.
And that's what great communication really does. I mean, that's true. Really, a great communication allows people to show up, and that's where the magic happens. If you've ever been in a group situation and you remove your personality as best you can, because I've had people in group settings in school say, man, I love how you come in and take over the room with your energy. And I'm like, I love how you can chameleon and fit in with people and not be the target. It's like we all have our personalities that we are, but what's different than a personality is your identity. And when you start to defend or feel that you're not enough, and then that kind of creeps into a conversation. And I don't think people are clear. That's something I want to add. Sometimes, like my mother-in-law, I love very much, but sometimes when she wants something from me, and it comes into my wife's world too, they'll ask around it. So for example, if she wants me to return the bottles to the LCBO from a weekender that we had with a bunch of people, and there's like 100 bottles, she'll be like, are you going close to Walmart? Are you doing that? She'll start asking me about my day. I'm like, what are you asking me? And that's like 3 questions later. It's like she's just trying to hint rather than being direct and saying, can you do this? But people are so worried about offending each other that they become unclear and create frustration rather than being direct with their conversations. And I kind of encourage, like, what are you worried about? It's like, well, I don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah.
Well, that's, if you can't offend anybody that doesn't choose to be offended.
Yeah.
And if you're coming from a place of compassion and love when you speak, and direct, I think direct is the most beautiful thing. Direct doesn't mean rude.
No.
It just means open and honest.
Well, and the other thing I see too is people that communicate to try and get the answer that they're looking for, as opposed to, right? They're like, the same idea. They'll speak around it, hoping that somehow they can word it so that you'll just be like, yeah, I'll do that for you. Instead of like, because they're afraid, they don't want to hear a no. They want to get the answer they're looking for. And so they'll try and communicate in a way to try and like create an outcome they're looking for.
Sounds like acting like a charade.
Yeah.
What are you doing? I was like, Mom, do you want me to return the bottles? Well, now that you brought it up, just ask. We could have saved like 10. I got to return them already by the time this conversation was over. And I get it, because a lot of people live on the defensive side of avoiding conflict.
Yep.
And we talked about conflict prior. It's like conflict's a good part of relationships, but it doesn't have to be an argument. And there doesn't even need to be conflict. It could be completely avoided when we come from a place of open.
Yeah. And even if there isn't a relationship there yet, and it's just beginning and you're first meeting a person, you defending your identity or trying to talk around something or trying to get seen could put a risk at actually being able to develop. You'll lose the opportunity to develop a relationship in that situation.
Because the real you is not showing up.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so if I in my head in the whole concept of communication about, what Arizona Andrew says is like, how would understanding, if you were just complete pure understanding, right? It's just pure understanding. What would that do in this conversation? Well, it wouldn't worry about not being loved. It wouldn't worry about, it goes back to nice versus kind. It goes back. So communication is a major key. I would say great communication comes from implementing all the things we teach. Yeah. Because that's what comes out of us, because your brain becomes an interpreter for the best part of you. Exactly. And then what comes out, and it goes back to one of my clients who just shared with us this week. He said when he's working with the staff that things were occurring for him that he used to go and have to strategize, but he goes, you don't have to remember the truth. No. You don't have to practice the truth. It just comes out of you, and it's more beautiful than anything you can strategize. It's honest. It's pure. It's easy to remember because it's there, and you don't have to navigate. And that's the problem with communication. Most communication has an agenda. Most communication has judgment in it. Most communication has fear in it. And when we remove all that things, communication becomes a lot easier. I remember, I used to tell you, I used to rehearse speeches and practice it. Now I go and I don't.
It's impressive.
It blew. When I did that speech for the big firm out north, I remember I brought my PowerPoints and they went and they put it up and they go, there's no, because it was on a presentation screen. They said, there's no slides. You're going to talk for 2 hours. I'm like, yeah. They're like, where's your
like your footnotes and stuff?
Like, in my brain, you memorized it? No, I just know I'm going to talk, and I'm just going to speak true. Yeah. And I remember when I was in Windsor, and I had a guy go, "What are you going to talk about for an hour and a half?" I'm like, I don't know. Kind of have an idea how I'm going to open and what I'm going to say.
Know how to get in, know how to get out.
Yeah, like jazz music, right?
Yeah.
And they said, you're going to speak off the cuff for an hour and a half? Does that not make you nervous? And I'm like, only when I think like we do. But what did I do? I went in, I did 2 hours, and they wanted more. And it was all, and why? Because when you are in pure understanding, when you're in pure connection to the people, you're not speaking brain to brain. You're actually connecting to a part of us that's more pure. And there's no way to offend the truth of who you are. There's no way that, because fear and judgment doesn't live there. What does love do? It loves, right? And what does understanding do? It understands. And when you bring that into people, because that's how you're showing up, communication shifts and your life is better. Yeah. Because it's all we have.
For sure. Yeah.
All we have to connect with each other outside of our hugs.
Very long, awkward hugs.
Yeah. Cheryl. If you're out there and you're listening to me. Yeah. Thank you for your 20-minute hugs, which I call cuddles.
Cuddles.
Yeah. So, communication is a beautiful thing when it's done from a place without identity. Yep. Anything else you want to talk about on that? I think we're getting close to our end. Anyways.
Yeah, I feel like that's.
So it's a great. We communicated very well.
We communicated communication in a very communicative way.
Yeah. Thanks goes out to your mom for actually recommending this to you.
Yeah. Thanks, awesome. Mom.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Jones.
We hope you got a little bit out of this today, and it impacts some of your communications a little bit more positively. We look forward to seeing you in our next episode. Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow along so you can get the next episode.
Have a great week.
Yeah. Much love.
luck. Bye.